Hello. All right. So we'll get started here. Welcome to Career Skills Week for fall 2021. And this is Resumes That Work. So I am Lindsay Granger Weaver, Senior Associate Director of Internship Programs here at Beyond Barnard, also the department's equity lead. And today we will be talking all about resumes. Yay, that all important document that you need to apply to just about anything. So let's get started. So this is the agenda. Resume what's? So just an overview, like what is a resume? What's answers, really brief, but very important things about resumes. We'll dig into the sections of a resume. So really what is the document, what it looks like, the different parts of it, how to write strong bullet points. It really is a formula. And once you learn that, that's helpful. Discuss transferable skills and translating the skills that you're learning and gaining in one place to another, some best and worst practices for resumes, and some of the top FAQs. And after that, we will have Q&A for everyone here. So again, feel free to put questions in the chat throughout, although I will likely check it at the end, in which case you can unmute yourselves and I can answer all the things that I didn't go over in this workshop. So major what's for resumes. So what is a resume? It's an application document, provides really important information about education, work experiences, activity experiences, and just your general skill set, but as it relates to a specific job. So it's not just like a general catch-all thing. It is related. It should be related to whatever you're applying to, whether I say job, but it could be internship or could be just general opportunity that requires a resume. And then the purpose is to get interviewed for that specific job, opportunity, internship, fellowship, whatever it is. The purpose is to get there, to get to the point where you can actually meet with somebody, you can explain your whole entirety of what's actually on your resume, your entirety of your experience. But the resume should be the thing that makes them want to learn more. It doesn't have to be the more. And I think that's a big thing that a lot of folks, especially if you're a first year or just starting out or just getting to a job or an opportunity search, that like the resume should be like all of the things, but it's really more tailored than maybe what's typically thought of. So those are like the big high level what's of a resume. And now we'll dig deeper into the document itself with sections. So this is generally what a resume looks like. It doesn't have to be as formatted like this. You don't have to have lines across or use the spot. But it is like, this is section by section what an undergraduate student resume tends to look like. So there's the heading, education section, some professional experiences. All of the dates are right aligned because it just makes it a lot easier to read and to kind of like review quickly. A lot of times resumes are reviewed pretty quickly at first. And then if they decide to, go through a second round of eyes or through an initial screening, then it's dug into more. And so the easier it is for someone to read it, the better. And so that's why like this type of formatting works. Also includes campus activities and then technical skills at the end, or not at the end. We'll talk about maybe some ways to shift it up. So this is basic. Yours doesn't have to look like this. It doesn't necessarily have to follow this chronological order. We'll talk about some of the differences or some of the ways that you can make this your own. But this in general is a good representation of a resume. So section by section, heading and education at the top, very simple. You don't have to put your street address or even your actual address. The applications may ask for that online, but the idea that they're going to send you something in the process of a job search is very, very rare these days. All they need is a way to get in touch with you. So that would be your email, phone number, city, if you are applying to things in New York, but say other experiences you have or from wherever you're from back home, then having New York on there shows that you are currently local. Other things that can be in your heading include your LinkedIn URL. You could also have maybe an international phone number if you are applying to things abroad. You can also have maybe like the URL of your portfolio. If you have maybe a preferred name that isn't your legal name, that you can put that on there too as parentheses, or have preferred name pronouns. Those things can all go in this top part of this heading. So in your education section, you should lead with Barnard, because that is the main education that you're currently doing. You align your graduation date if it's in the future, as I'm assuming you're all undergraduate students, or maybe some recent grads in here, but either way, if you're an undergrad, you can put expected May, or if it's a summer graduation, and then the year. But have that over to the side, the same way that on the sample resume, all the other dates were aligned. GPA can go over there, can also go with your Bachelor of Arts and the degree information. Study abroad, if you have that or plan to do that, that goes here as well, underneath of Barnard, and you would just put your host institution, and then for the dates, it would just be the semesters that you were there. You can also, if you are a first year or sophomore, feel free to still have your high school information on here, both your education and also maybe some activities if they were very significant. Starting end of sophomore year, definitely into junior and senior year, high school should be off. I know with the COVID restrictions, there may have been some challenge in filling up college things on your resume, in which case you can keep high school things on there, both the name of your high school and then the activities, if they are relevant to the thing that you're applying for. So on the sample resume, so we're talking about now sections and headings, using those effectively. You saw that this was the professional experience section. And so basically that would be anything that was done off campus. And so if you look at these all, so headings relating to the job, if you look at all of the things in here, they're all very similar, all kind of social sector, nonprofit, advocacy kinds of work. And so that's why instead of it saying as the heading, professional experience or work experience or something that's a broad catch-all, they really tailored it to match. They're likely applying to things that are in this similar vein. And so they changed it to match those things. So if, for example, a lot of your experiences are in, the education sector, you can say teaching and administrative experience, or if you're into financial services, you can say banking and finance. So putting things together in a way that makes the most sense for the position you're applying to will make your resume resonate with the people who are reading it. And so campus activities also count within this. And you describe them, the significant ones at least, you can describe them the same way as your work experiences. So as you can see, go back to here, the bullets, and we'll talk about crafting bullets later on, but the bullets are all kind of similar. And so there really isn't a distinction, at least visually, in the ways that these are described. And so it both highlights the fact that they're significant, but also shows that they are, also shows them in a way that highlights the value of these experiences. And so I'm thinking back to that last one about the headings. This could also be a case where instead of activities and leadership, if there's a theme in the activities, then it could be that. Or this person could even take this SGA position, move it up to the top, to that other section where all of the political and advocacy experience was, and that would actually fit there too. So there's space to move it around, just depending on what you're applying to. Really just group your experiences and know that you can group quote unquote professional and also, campus activities, volunteer things together, as long as there's a similar thread between them. And then usually at the bottom, sometimes for different industries, you can put your skills section at the top. So the technical skills are really important. And it can be something, as simple as Microsoft Office, which I feel my toddler probably knows how to use Microsoft Word, but it's still helpful because a lot of organizations use it. A lot of times it's in a job description. And so it's something that when you apply online and the bots will read your resume first, it reads your application first. And if that's in the job description, then you want it in your resume because then that'll show even more of the ways that you are related to that job. So for technical skills, you can put, if you've done certifications or workshops in class or out of class, just like on your own, then you can add those there. You can highlight, within the bullet points, you can add context to these skills, and then you can also have them here as well. It doesn't mean that it's redundant. It's just kind of giving the person multiple places to see that you have the skill set. And then also, if you're on a job search and you're looking at job descriptions and you're seeing different types of skills that you may not have or things you want to brush up on, then use some Barnard resources. The Milstein Center has some really great classes. I took an Excel class over there and promptly forgot everything, but at the time it felt like it was really helpful. And then also the Computational Sciences Center has some great resources as well. Languages can be tricky. I would say one rule of thumb is to label it maybe a little bit less. So unless you are completely fluent or have like native fluency, so that if you say that you can speak Dutch and then somebody starts speaking to you in that language in the interview, then they know maybe you shouldn't. They may expect you to be fluent when you're not. And so always show a little less so that you can like under promise and over deliver unless you're completely comfortable with it. And then interests can be used sparingly. A lot of times it's helpful in industries where resumes can look very similar. So if you're interested in, say, financial services, where the bulk of the applications coming from a place like Barnard will be econ majors and will have similar sorts of club activities, similar sorts of experiences, then you can add interest there just to kind of to help you stand out a little bit. In interviews, it can be helpful because then they see something and you can start talking about it and it helps personalize you. But if there's no space for it, and also if there are things that kind of like don't make you stand out a little bit, or you have enough different types of experiences that you can kind of know that you're out of the pack, then you can leave off the interests. So back to the sample resume with a little bit more detail now. So it's a simple heading. Again, it doesn't have to look like that. It can have more personal identifiers if you need it to, and definitely links as well. Education comes first, coursework, GPA, all of that. If you don't have a major yet, you can either have anticipated major or expected major, or just have Bachelor of Arts, and then they'll see that you just started and be fine with that. Use your headings to your advantage. So as you can see, kind of what I was referencing before, like with political advocacy experience, some of the things perhaps from the activities and leadership section can go up there depending on the role, but don't feel like you need to group them together by like paid or unpaid or any kind of like campus related status. It's really about I guess the subject or the general industry relation that you would have within these different activities. Right, align your dates, and also you can see that the dates are in reverse chronological order, and they have to be like that within the section, but not necessarily on the document itself. Highlighting transferable skills from campus activities, and we'll dig into that a little bit later, but basically the skills that you're gaining do have value off campus outside of these activities. And so figuring out which ones relate to the ones you're applying to and amplifying them within your bullet points in a way that's going to show that this wasn't just some activity that you went to, that you gained a lot, and that you can then pass on that skill set to the employer. And then with technical skills, sometimes, so for like technical positions, for example, like in tech, perhaps splitting up technical and language and moving that up, or even just keeping that section together, and you can move it to right below education, because for some of those roles, that is just as important as where you went to school, and also more important sometimes than the context in which you use those skills. So in explaining your experiences. So some specific exceptions, kind of what I was just mentioning, this technical summary, sometimes comes under a heading, sometimes can come under education. But really it would involve just putting out there all of the technical skills you have, so different programming languages or coding experience, and really use the job description as a guide for this. And just make sure that if you have experience with the things that they are mentioning for the role, that you have that front and center, because that is going to be very important. Promotions within one organization aren't put as separate positions. They're put under the umbrella organization title. And I'll show you one of the examples later on has that. So I'll refer back to this bullet. But for one, it saves space, but also it highlights the fact that you were promoted, which is really a really good thing. And then you can add coursework, or even just like talking about class projects or independent projects on your resume, if you don't have a lot of official work or activity experience, which, it may be the case because the past academic year and a half have been very disjointed, and it's been very difficult to kind of get involved in some activities, kind of the thing I've heard, and very difficult definitely to get, especially in the beginning, kind of get like internships and some of the traditional work experience that you would have on your resume. And so feel free to add your coursework in the education section, add the relevant coursework in there. And then also you can have a section for like independent projects or relevant projects. And if you did something like in class that relates, so if you are in some sort of computer science class and you're applying to a tech role that there's some similarities, or you did a project that's related to, some of the things they're asking for, then that can go on your resume also, especially since we are talking about this being very specific to a job. Just think of all of your experiences and mind them, so that the document you put out there, whether it skews more heavily to off campus or on campus or independent, is something that is the strongest for that role. So now, speaking of strong, we'll talk about these very important bullet points. So the structure of a bullet point, they all are structured the same way. So it's your action. So what did you do? So the action verb, and then the quantity, or the amount of time you spent, or the frequency, the volume, totals of things, all of that, things that quantify the experience, that provide the scope. Then also the outcome. So what was the result of your action? And so here's an example. And this is also an example of getting a promotion. So as you can see, they went from writing fellow to head writing fellow. So the action here was provided, and then the quantity. So approximately 25 students per week. Then improve technical and analytical written ability. So that's the outcome. And so it doesn't have to be something like a profit loss kind of outcome or something like that. It's just like, why did you do what you did? What was the result of this? And so it's like all of them follow some semblance of this pattern, strong bullets, and it just provides the full context of a position. So if you have a couple of bullets that are this detail, then you give the reader a very good idea of what you did. So the STAR method is helpful in interviews. If you come to our interview workshop on Friday, you'll hear more about that. But in writing bullets, it's good to help you conceptualize what you're thinking about, not necessarily within one bullet, but just within an experience of itself. And so think of the situation. So where were you working? What were you doing? Kind of create the scene. Think of your role. So what specific tasks were involved, and what was your responsibility within those tasks? So what did you actually do? These would be your action verbs. for however many bullets you need. And then what were the results of your efforts? What were the outcomes? And it can be, you know, connecting like action to result. And this really is how you think about the experience that you're describing, and then break it down into individual bullets so that when they read it, they get, again, like that full scope. And so in doing this, you know, most people don't immediately write in bullet point form. One thing that has been really helpful for me, and also for students and alums that I've worked with, is to like brainstorm just kind of like word association or something. Like, what did you do in this role? Think about every single thing, and then edit it down into that structure of like action, quantity, outcome, and see how that can kind of make sure that like the ones that you have on your resume are the most effective together. And so some of the strong verbs, and I'm going to read them all, let y'all look at them, but just like ones that show agency. And so comparing the verbs, you know, under like the headings to the weaker and weakest. I mean, the weakest are words that aren't verbs. The weakest bullets start with things like I, because the I on a resume is implied, since these are all your experiences. But like looking at the ones that are weaker, so assisted, learned, understood, like the things that don't really show what the impact that you had. So they, I mean, and they can be there if that was a big part of your role, but I think like mixing them in with some of the stronger verbs really shows like more of what you did and more of the impact that you had in that position. And so now talking more about the skills themselves. So top skills, these are things that really cut across all industries, all types of jobs, whether you're interested in like nonprofits or interested in consulting or nonprofit consulting or education, anything. So people want you to be, employers want you to be able to work in teams. They want to see that you can lead, not necessarily all the time, but that you are able to manage people and bring them along and, you know, do something from start to finish that is of your vision and have people buy it. Comms or communications, that you can write, which is something that employers all the time tell us that Barnard students are excellent writers, but also that you can communicate ideas and that you both know how to say what you need to say, but also how to listen to others effectively and empathetically. Analysis, are you able to analyze things, analyze text, analyze numbers, analyze whatever you need to reach an outcome. Budget, so like numeracy, quantitative knowledge, and then teaching, which kind of falls into a lot of these, but just being able to have an idea and help other people understand it. It's not necessarily like being a teacher, like a classroom teacher, but just like, can you communicate for understanding purposes? And so these skills, again, like we see them in job descriptions all the time. We hear them from employers all the time. And they're also things that you can pick up in internships, but you can also pick them up in clubs. You can pick them up, you know, babysitting or doing anything. And so as long as you're really focusing on, you know, skill building in some of these key areas, then you should be able to then pivot to whatever you're thinking that you want to do, and be able to have a compelling resume, have a compelling cover letter, which we'll go over tomorrow, and just be able to really communicate that and be qualified for the things that you're interested in. And so in translating some of these skills, so thinking about maybe your own, you know, where your experiences lie, whether it's cutting across all of these or in some of them, look at these and kind of think about the ones that you may want to use, think about the ones that you may be interested in honing more, because they all, again, fall into those other categories, but from the last slide, but in different ways. And don't feel like you need to write all this down, because you'll get, this is why we're recording, so you can come back to this. And so again, breaking it down even more for things about every industry. So sometimes you can, and as you can like look through these and kind of see that there are some similarities across different fields. but the way it's really just highlighting the fact that like the way that certain things are described in one industry may not be described in the same way in another, but it's essentially a similar task. And so it's useful if you are interested in like doing similar work across different fields. So if you're interested in, say, writing broadly, but writing for a financial services organization is going to be different from public relations, different from like writing more technically for like a STEM role. And so this slide highlights the fact that like you may have to describe your experience differently. And so it's helpful to like use the different job descriptions as a guide and just like mimic the language that they use. So that you know, again, that the person reading it will resonate with your experience because you're speaking their language. And so coming to a close here, but some of the best and worst practices for resumes, and I'll let you guys read this. So this is best practices or do. Clear formatting, because people don't spend a lot of time on them. A single page is necessary at this point, especially applying for jobs and internships. Be sure that it highlights things as opposed to highlights achievements and outcomes, not necessarily processes and tasks. You can describe those things in interviews or even in a cover letter if necessary. Definitely the action verbs and separate things by skill set. And then, you know, quantifying, identifying scope. And so these are all the really like the best practices for your resume, for describing your experiences, and just for really making sure that it represents you and also represents your experiences in the best possible way. And so the don'ts or the worst practices, you know, vague terms, it's very clear sometimes if you either are trying to say that you did more than you did, or if you're purposefully like obfuscating what you did. People who read resumes a lot can tell. And so it's just really like own the experience, I think, is that first part. Unconventional formats and tactics are tricky. One good rule is that if you are applying online, have that very simple, clean resume, because you're more likely to have bots go over it. And depending on the software, they can't read the graphs and all the graphics. And so it could just come out a mess. I've seen it. It's pretty bad. But if you're meeting someone in person, or if you are emailing it to them, then you can have a little bit different, some graphics if necessary. Colored paper, probably not. Definitely don't include everything you've ever done. This is, again, a very tailored document. If you know, were the 8th grade spelling bee champion, that's amazing, but that maybe shouldn't be on your resume right now. Don't use the same resume for every position, because it's really like being specific for the job. Even if you just tweak it a little bit, just like reading over things, make sure that the language of the job description is mimicked the language on your resume. And then don't use the generic category titles. You really want to take that extra time to tailor those, and take the extra time to really make sure that they are speaking to your experience and then speaking to the role. So here's some of the top FAQs. And then after this, we can go into your AQs. I'll let you ask questions. So how do I tailor a resume to a specific job? When and where should I include relevant coursework, and should I include references? So to tailor a resume, again, these are things I've touched on throughout, but using the job description as a guide is very helpful. And there are, you know, career resource sites out there, or even just other job descriptions of similar roles in the similar industry could be helpful if the one that you're applying to is some of them are like 2 lines, and that's not helpful for you. So just in that case, you can look beyond. You always want to also front load the document with the most relevant experiences. And so changing those headings really helps to front load, because then they can immediately see, again, that your experiences are related to the job. So then changing the section titles. So it's really about mirroring the language in a job description, changing the section titles, and perhaps grouping things a little differently so that everything that they need to see, everything that is going to be like, oh yes, I'm qualified and here's why, is in that first third to half of your resume. So relevant coursework, again, it's not required. It's helpful to show if you have like a knowledge in a certain area, but not necessarily like professional experience in that area, then you can just put in the courses that you've taken that are related to show that you understand the work, you just haven't done it yet. But the coursework, it's not your whole transcript, and it also shouldn't be implied by your major or minor. So if you're an economics major, then you don't want to put intro to econ because that's kind of, they know that. But if you've taken upper level courses or some of the advanced coursework or some of the content, if they expect you to know certain things in the job description, then be sure to have those courses there. And you don't have to put anything else beyond the course title. Like you don't have to put the grade that you received or the semester that you took it. One thing that could be useful if it's like in progress, then you can put that there. But otherwise, it's really just showing that you have a background. And references. Don't put references on your resume ever. That's kind of like something I know my parents put references on their resumes and they're retired. So that's not something that we do anymore. Employers will ask for references. They'll either be a separate page on the application or they'll say submit the contact information of 2 to 3 people as part of your application. So you don't need to take up the space on your resume. And it's also most likely not a letter. Very rarely will positions ask for letters of reference at the beginning. Usually it's just contact information. And then as you get later on, if you're one of the final candidates, then someone will call them. So that is it for this. Thank you all so much for coming and for being here on a day that looks like it's becoming a lot nicer. But if there are questions, I can quit the share so that we can ask. Feel free to unmute yourselves. You can stay off camera if you'd like, or put something in the chat if you would like to ask things anonymously, and I will answer. Okay. Even if we have relevant experiences from high school, should they no longer be included in our resumes after sophomore year? So it depends. I think given the way that things have been going, and the lack of just being able to gain some experiences, then if they are directly related to the position, then you can leave it on your resume for now. I would say it shouldn't be a focal point if you're beyond sophomore year, but if it's just something to show that you've got some experience and something that you can kind of point to in a cover letter, point to in an interview, or just kind of provide that employer with the knowledge that you've got some experience there, then that's fine. Could graphic design on your resume be used as a way to differentiate yourself, or would it come off tacky? How much would be accepted? You're welcome. It depends again. So graphic design could be, anything from like having different colored, name and heading versus pictures or cartoons, and it really it depends on the role. So some creative roles you have some more leeway because it can be seen as maybe like it's a graphic design position, for example, then it can be seen as kind of like you showing off your skill set. Although for those roles, you may also want to link to a portfolio. I always say when you're applying online, like through an application system, to have it as simple as possible, just so that you can get it through. And then once you get called in for an interview, or once, if you have a direct contact person there, then you can send something that's a little fancier, because you know that it's not going to mess up your chances of actually meeting a person. Tacky is subjective. So I don't think that any sort of formatting or fonts should take away from the content, which should be the thing that differentiates you the most. So all the rest would be like showing bits of personality, but you shouldn't like rely on other things to make you differentiate, because it should be your experiences and the way that you talk about them. But if you have a question about that, then you can meet with one of our PCAs or meet with an advisor, and we can kind of help you differentiate like how much is too much with that. Should soft skills be included in a resume? So I don't think they should be included in that skills section. You're welcome. But you can put them in context in the bullets. And they should be soft skills that are less subjective than, say, like hard worker, because that's kind of, everyone feels like they're a hard worker unless know that you're not. But try as much as you can with some of the soft skills to have them within the context and to kind of prove it and to show it, as opposed to just listing it out decontextualized. So is there a soft skill that you're thinking about adding to your resume and unsure about? Okay, soft skills in general. Yeah, I would say generally you want to add those in your bullet points and make sure that that comes across. And then a cover letter, though, is where you could describe more and show off the soft skills that you have. You see, we're dropping like flies here. So if there are any final questions or anything, or I can stop recording if you have other questions that you would like answered. I'm happy to do that too. All right, well, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate this. Feel free to come in to me on Barnard or email if you have any questions about this or anything career related.